The cruelest part is not the cheating, it is not even the public humiliation. The cruelest part is that she walks into that wedding already knowing the man at the altar is a monster and still chooses to go through with it, just not in the way anyone expected. He thought he was about to marry the perfect bride. What he actually did was hand the mic to the one person who could ruin his entire life. And from that point on, nobody wins clean.
Imagine this. On the very morning she was to be shackled to a monster, Adriana Varelli approached a different man at the altar, igniting a firestorm in the heart of Chicago's underworld. The fuse was lit 3 hours prior when she discovered her fiancé entwined with her own cousin. Most would have broken or simply stood frozen in despair. But not Adriana. No, she chose instead to aim for the throat. Arriving at the ceremony, she executed a plan she had quietly cultivated for months, marrying another. Before 300 guests, the city's most feared crime boss witnessed the first crack in his empire's foundation. The aftershocks are still being felt, so tell us from where you are listening tonight. Let's rewind to the moment of detonation. The air in the villa suite was heavy with costly perfume and the foul odor of betrayal. Adriana halted in the doorway, her wedding gown still shrouded in its bag. A spectator to a scene engineered to inflict absolute devastation, her intended Lucian Moretti, a name that made Chicago's underworld tremble, was lost in the sheets with her cousin Isabella. The two of them remained completely unaware of her presence. A faint sigh of triumph from Isabella drifted across the room. Adriana's knuckles turned white against the doorframe, a silent testament to her rage. Yet there were no tears, no audible gasp. She was a statue of pure ice. This moment is the story's fulcrum, not for what she witnessed, but for the profound, chilling emptiness she revealed. There was no visceral stab of pain, no shock of the unexpected, only the cold, methodical arrival of reality. On some deep level, she had always sensed this day would come, having ignored the warnings about Lucian's true nature for far too long. Isabella noticed her first, crying out with a predictable terror that would have been comical at any other time. In a futile gesture, Isabella scrambled for a sheet to conceal herself, as if linen could erase the past 60 seconds. Lucian turned his head with a slow, predatory stillness. His gaze met Adriana's, devoid of remorse, holding only cold calculation. Like a general studying a shift on the battlefield. Adriana. His voice was utterly level, completely untroubled. He rose from the bed, unconcerned with his own nakedness. You are early. That was his only offering. No apology, no trace of regret, merely an observation on her timing. Isabella stumbled from the bed, clutching the sheet. Audrey, it's not... We weren't... Go, Adriana commanded, her voice a dangerous whisper. Her cousin froze. What? I said go! Adriana's tone was flat, stripped of all feeling. Her eyes remained fixed on Lucian. Get dressed and leave this place now. Isabella shot a look at Lucian, likely expecting him to intervene, to silence Adriana. He only observed Adriana with a sort of detached curiosity. Snatching her clothes, Isabella fled, the clatter of her heels on the marble floor marking a sharp, humiliating retreat. The door clicked shut, leaving a silence that was absolute. Lucian, entirely comfortable in his skin, wandered to the bar. He poured a measure of whiskey, indifferent to the hour. Sunlight streamed through the vast windows, illuminating the scars across his chest, a violent history he had never once shared. We should review the ceremony's schedule, he stated, sipping his drink. The photographer arrives at 11. We must... You believe this wedding is proceeding? Her words were not an inquiry. They were a declaration. Lucian faced her, one eyebrow slightly raised. Of course it is. I found you with my cousin." He merely shrugged, a motion that screamed of his utter indifference. "Isabella is nothing. You are aware of that. Am I, Adriana?" He placed his glass down, approaching her with the fluid grace of a hunter. Men like Lucian Moretti believe the world will either bend to their will or be shattered. "Do not be so theatrical. 300 guests arrive in 4 hours. All is arranged. The gown is perfect." His gaze shifted to the garment bag. "You are always at your most beautiful when wearing what I have chosen for you." And there it was, the very heart of his corrupted logic. It was never about her beauty. It was about her compliance. "This wedding will happen," Lucian continued, his voice hardening from silk to iron. "You will walk that aisle, you will appear flawless for the cameras, and you will become my wife. That was our pact. It is what your father consented to when he accepted my money to rescue his collapsing company." Adriana's jaw clenched. "My father's debt does not grant you ownership of me." "Does it not?" Lucian's smile was as sharp as a stiletto. "Your family owes me $17 million, Adriana. Your father's establishments remain open by my permission alone. A single call from me and they cease to exist. Your mother's home, your sister's education, your brother's medical care." He moved closer, cornering her against the wall. "Do you truly believe you possess a choice in this matter? That you can simply turn and leave?" She had heard variations of this threat countless times, the reminder that her family's well-being rested entirely in his grasp. But now, with the lingering scent of Isabella in the room, it felt like a final, unbreakable chain. A strange tranquility settled over her. "So that is the arrangement," she murmured. "I am merely an entry on a ledger. This is all simply a transaction." Lucian's hand rose, gently tucking a loose strand of her hair. The gesture was meant to seem tender, but it felt like a manacle locking onto her wrist. "The sooner you accept that, the simpler your life will become." "I can offer you everything, Adriana. Security, influence, a fortress against your enemies. You only need the wisdom to accept it. In exchange, you will obey my commands." His tone was absolute, the sound of a final bargain. "You will smile. You will be flawless. You will never inquire about my affairs. You will bear my children when I decree it is time. And you will never, ever humiliate me in public." His hand came to rest on her throat, not applying pressure, but heavy with unspoken violence, an unmistakable physical warning. "Is that understood?" Adriana stared at him, the man she had consented to marry 6 months before, back when the arrangement felt manageable, when she convinced herself she could endure it. She had even been naive enough to imagine that love might one day blossom between them. What a cruel fantasy that had been. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Perfectly understood." A self-satisfied smile crept across Lucian's lips. He kissed her forehead, a condescending gesture for a daughter who had finally learned her place. "Good girl, now prepare yourself." "And Adriana," he added, turning back to his whiskey, "wear the diamonds I sent, not your mother's pearls. The diamonds." She departed without another word, the garment bag now feeling as if it were weighted with stone. The bridal suite, when she reached it, was a storm of controlled chaos. Her mother, Lucia Varelli, was pacing, debating fiercely in Italian over floral arrangements. Her sister Sophia was draped over a sofa, radiating the profound boredom unique to an 18-year-old. Stylists stood ready by the vanity, their instruments arranged like a surgeon's tray. Adriana! Her mother ended her call and hurried to her, her hands fluttering with anxiety. Where were you? We are hopelessly behind. The stylist requires a minimum of 2 hours. She paused, her keen eyes detecting the subtle change in Adriana's expression. What is it? Nothing. Adriana hung the gown. I am here. You are ashen. Sophia, fetch your sister some water. Lucia tilted Adriana's face, inspecting her for the smallest imperfection. Are you nervous? It is perfectly natural for a bride to feel some anxiety. I am fine, Mama. You do not appear fine. You look. Lucia's voice fell to a conspiratorial whisper. Did you and Lucian have a disagreement? Adriana recalled Lucian's hand on her neck, his absolute certainty that she would simply submit, that she possessed no other path. No, she replied. We did not disagree. Some of the tension eased from Lucia's shoulders. Good, excellent. This union, Adriana, you grasp its importance, yes? For our family. I understand. Your father's enterprise. I am aware, Mama. And Lucian is a suitable match. He is powerful, certainly, and his business is complex, but he will ensure our safety, all of us. Lucia's eyes were filled with a desperate need for validation, pleading with Adriana to affirm her words. That has value, does it not? Adriana gazed at her mother, a woman bred for grace, obedience, and strategic silence, now imposing that very existence upon her own daughter, as if it were some great inheritance. Yes, Mama, Adriana said. It has immense value. The falsehood tasted like ash in her mouth. Sophia came back with the water, her gaze far more perceptive than anyone gave her credit for. Are you all right? She asked softly as their mother was again lost in a phone call. Perfect. You are a dreadful liar, Sophia countered. You have that look on your face, the one you get just before you act. I have no idea what you are referring to. Yes, you do. It's the same expression you had before you would slip out of the house, just before you did something that would send Papa into a rage. Sophia tilted her head. What are you planning, Audrey? To be married. Exactly as everyone wishes. Sophia studied her for a moment longer before offering a slight shrug. All right, but whatever you are truly planning, I hope you succeed spectacularly. Before Adriana could answer, a phone vibrated inside her handbag. She drew it out, her eyes falling on the screen. The message was from Contractor, a code name selected to appear innocuous to any prying eyes. Our Adriana is already a shadow in motion, severing all contact with her external asset, Ethan. The protocol is flawless, leaving no digital trace of her descent. Her heart pounds against her ribs, but it is merely the rhythm accompanying a masterpiece of rebellion. The ritual begins. In the mirror, she watches herself fade, an empty stage for the coming tragedy. Then, a message from her cousin, Isabella, cracks the hollow calm. Isabella sends her usual poison, a performance of betrayal, followed by a worthless apology. Adriana recognizes the sickness, but saves her energy for the real fight. She offers no reply. The makeup artist remarks on her tension, telling her to relax. A faint smile is her only response. Nearby, her mother fusses over trifles, willfully blind to the inferno consuming her daughter. The room dissolves into a memory from 3 months ago, the night she met Ethan Caldwell. She was just playing a part then, an accessory for the tyrant Lucian in a beautiful gilded prison. He broke the silent rules simply by asking if she was all right. That small act of humanity struck her like a physical blow, forming a crack in the fortress around her soul. He saw through her flawless performance. He spoke of his own mother's masked pain, creating an unexpected bond. His quiet words, "She got out," became a blueprint for her own freedom. Adriana understood his words were a lifeline. Their first conversations were carefully neutral, building a fragile trust under the guise of innocent chat. He followed with sharper questions about her safety, her happiness. With each empty no she gave, he only listened, allowing her denials to become their own confession. To defeat a man like Lucian, you need an ironclad case. His ego would demand retribution, so her escape had to be a perfectly documented offensive. A secret team began assembling the file. For 3 months, they gathered proof of his crimes and his violence. That file would be both her shield and his warrant. The final brushstroke finishes not a face, but an elaborate mask. Her reflection is a paradox, a disguise that offers safety by erasing who she is. A soft thank you completes the deception. Each perfect curl transforms her from a woman to an object, a doll prepared for the highest bidder. Her mother's whisper, "Perfect," is the family's seal of approval on the transaction. The gown, created under Lucian's obsessive direction, feels less like a dress and more like a restraint. She sees his control woven into its very design, a symbol of her gilded cage. In the glass, she sees not herself, but a trophy to display Lucian's power. A text from Ethan makes her hand shake, a jolt of fear she quickly hides in the fabric. Her father, Marco, arrives, carrying the weight of the family's ruin. His posture tells the story of the financial collapse this wedding was designed to erase. She sees the cold reality beneath his warm embrace. Her future is the closing price on a $17 million failure. To save their name, she must be the asset sold. She asks him when this was her decision. He dismisses it as simple nerves, his grip on her arm a silent command to fall back in line. She wrenches her arm free, dismissing his lies and asking the question again. His face hardens as he speaks of family duty, confirming a choice was never hers to make. Adriana feigns surrender, reciting their empty mantra. Family first. He believes he has won and begins to praise Lucian, the enabler defending the monster. Marco's excuse only reveals his weakness. Selling his daughter buys him a better life. A better life, she thinks, as property. The beautiful room feels like an auction block. She observes the whole affair from a distance, a general reviewing her battle plans. She counts the minutes in her head, a small trick to keep the rising panic caged. She imagines the empty vows, the feeling of Lucian's ownership. A message from Ethan demands a response. Her finger hovers over the screen, poised over the trigger. She sees Lucian clearly now. He is incapable of love, only of possession. She knows that to flee after the vows would bring absolute destruction upon her family. The calculation is terrifying. This public stage, before 300 witnesses, is her only chance to turn his own power against him. In a final, silent accounting, she reviews the facts: her family's betrayal, Lucian's quiet threats, her parents' silent consent, and one knowing look from her sister Sophia. This is her case. The girl who might have endured him is gone, replaced by a woman determined to be free. She reclaims her soul as she types, "Yes," the command to begin the assault. Ethan's reply is instantaneous. The asset is in play. Following the plan, she deletes the exchange and asks her mother for a moment alone. The request is granted. With 60 seconds to go, the door locks, sealing Adriana inside. She sees Lucian at the altar, standing by a man tied to 3 unsolved murders. Lucian looks like a prince. He projects an aura of total power. His men scan the 300 guests, their suits a thin cover for the danger beneath. A clean getaway is impossible. Her plan is incendiary. Her phone buzzes. The call is from a private number, Agent Sarah Chen of the FBI. "Units are in place on your signal." The title makes it all real. For a moment, she wondered if she could walk that aisle. But then she looks at the man who valued her like an object, and all she feels is cold rage. A quiet knock from Marco. It is time. She turns. I'm ready. Taking his arm, they walk toward the music. Cameras flash as the crowd turns, every face wearing a smile. Her sister Sophia scatters petals, her expression unreadable. The white aisle stretches on, where Lucian waits with a proprietary smile. Adrenaline surges through Adriana. Her heart pounds as her hands grow cold. Halfway down the aisle, her eyes meet Ethan's. A silent glance is exchanged. His subtle nod says everything. She keeps walking. 3 rows to go, the sound of screeching tires cuts through the music. Confusion ripples across the room. Lucian's men tense, their hands moving to their coats. 2 rows, the cars stop. Doors fly open, men in dark suits emerge. They are not with Lucian. 1 row from the altar, Adriana stops. Marco's face is a canvas of confusion. Adriana! She pulls her arm from his grip and turns as Ethan walks toward her. The crowd murmurs. Lucian steps forward, his face hardening. What is the meaning of this? He snarls. Adriana does not hear him. Her focus is on Ethan, the only person who offered care without a price. He returned the strength that everyone else had stripped away. He stands before her. Are you certain? He asks softly. A flood of memories, Lucian's rage, her family's silence answers him. I'm certain, she answers. Taking Ethan's hand, she walks not to Lucian, but to the dazed officiant. The room erupts. Lucian moves to stop her, but 2 FBI agents step smoothly in his path. Adriana! Lucian's voice is a raw explosion. What are you doing? She meets his glare, her hand in Ethan's. I am making my choice. You have no choice. Yes, she says, with perfect calm. I do. The lost officiant looks between them. I don't understand. We need you to perform a wedding, Ethan's voice rings out. Between myself and Adriana. Now. A thick silence falls, broken by Lucian's sharp, disbelieving laugh. You think you can marry another man at my wedding? This is not your wedding, Adriana retorts. It is mine, and I choose him. Lucian's face flushes. You're picking this nobody over. Ethan Caldwell, Ethan finishes smoothly. Chief Executive Officer of Caldwell Ventures. My net worth is around $2.3 billion. More to the point, I asked what Adriana wanted. The entire room detonates. People jump to their feet, phones held high. Adriana's mother looks faint. Her father is frozen, understanding dawning. Sophia, however, is smiling. This is insane, Marco gasps. Adriana, stop this. No, Dad. You'll ruin us. The debt. Lucian won't touch you, Ethan cuts in. Not with this file detailing 17 of his federal crimes ready for the authorities. He gestures to the agents. In fact, many of these guests are federal agents. So unless he wants to be arrested right now, he will allow this. Lucian's jaw is clenched, his hands balled into white fists. You have no idea what you've done. Oh, I really do, Adriana replies. I am taking my life back. The minister looks to the agents for a sign. One of them, Agent Chen, gives a sharp nod. You may continue, she tells him. This marriage is legal, they have a license. She produces a certificate filed that morning. Lucian's men are trapped. Their options are to surrender or face federal prosecution. They surrender. With unsteady hands, the minister opened his book to the worn page. Ethan Caldwell, will you take Adriana Varley to be your lawfully wedded wife? Ethan's reply was firm. I do. His gaze never leaving hers. And Adriana Varley, will you take Ethan Caldwell to be your husband? Her eyes darted to Lucian, savoring the shock and unbridled rage as he realized she was about to shatter his world. She turned back to Ethan, a man promising partnership, not possession. I do, she answered, her voice unwavering. Then I now pronounce you husband and wife. The kiss Ethan gave her was brief, sealing not a romance but an agreement. He drew away, whispering, You're free. A bittersweet lie, she knew. Freedom was still a distant shore. But it was one hell of a beginning. The room descended into chaos. Half the guests scrambled for the doors while the others stood paralyzed, witnessing the fallout. 100 phones were already recording the spectacle. Lucian stood abandoned at the altar, his expression a masterpiece of cold, controlled fury. This is your end, he vowed, his voice a low poison that sliced through the silence. The two of you. I'll destroy you. I will burn everything you love to ash. He dismissed the approaching federal agents with the flick of his wrist. Agent Chen began, Mr. Moretti, I'm placing you under arrest for... We'll do this later. Lucian's smile in the low light was a sharpened blade. Your case is weak, for the moment. My lawyers make problems vanish. His gaze locked onto Adriana, including fiancés who step out of place. Her own stare was unyielding. I was never yours to possess, Lucian. She turned, took Ethan's arm, and walked through the crowd of stunned faces, past her weeping mother and a father whose face now carried the weight of 10 more years. As she passed her sister, Sophia's hand squeezed hers, a silent message of approval. They slipped into Ethan's waiting car. Pulling away, Adriana looked back at Lucian, a king standing untouched amidst the chaos, encircled by agents. His public humiliation a show for 300 onlookers. Deep down, she knew this was only the first battle in a long war. The car navigated Chicago's streets with practiced ease. Adriana, still in her wedding gown, saw the city lights smear into streaks of color, and as the adrenaline faded, a violent tremor started in her hands. Just breathe, Ethan said softly. She struggled to steady her breath against the tightness in her chest. I can't believe I did that. You were magnificent. I ruined him in front of everyone. The chilling reality of her defiance began to sink in. He'll send people to kill us. He'll certainly try, Ethan concurred. Ethan was already on his phone, his voice low. But we're still ahead of him. Chen's people are hitting 4 of his locations as we speak. His assets are being frozen, and your family is being moved into protection. Adriana's head whipped around. My family would never go for that. My father will just try to bargain with Lucian himself. Sophia promised she would get them to cooperate. She knew what was happening. A shadow of guilt touched Ethan's expression. She put it all together 2 weeks back and came to me. She threatened to expose us if we didn't include her. Adriana felt a hysterical laugh bubble up inside her. Classic Sophia. And you told her? The unvarnished truth, that you were getting out and we couldn't let Lucian use your family against you. He held out his phone, showing a message from Sophia. They're secure. Mom is losing it, but Dad is en route to the safe house. Adriana shut her eyes. My mother will despise me for this. Perhaps for a time, Ethan's tone was detached. But she'll be alive to do so. That's all that counts. The vehicle glided into a subterranean garage. The driver, a former Secret Service agent named Marcus, checked the perimeter before they exited. A secure elevator lifted them to a penthouse where Agent Chen awaited them. Sarah Chen was younger than expected. perhaps in her early 30s, her sharp gaze taking in everything. She rose as they came in, holding a tablet. "Mrs. Caldwell," she greeted, and the new name hit Adriana with the force of a physical blow. She was a wife, truly a wife, just not to the man the world expected. "Quite the display you put on." "It wasn't a display," Adriana answered quietly. "I'm aware. It's what made it so convincing." Chen motioned toward the couch. "Have a seat. We need to discuss the next steps." Adriana collapsed onto the sofa, the silk of her dress spilling around her feet. Ethan took a seat nearby, maintaining a respectful space. Chen began swiping through files on her screen. "Lucian is already making his moves. We're monitoring communications to his legal team, his security detail, and his enforcers. He's plotting his retaliation." "What sort of retaliation?" "All-out war. He's targeting Ethan's companies first, aiming to trigger a panic sale, cashing in chips, and circulating whispers of instability. It's a crude tactic, but effective if we don't move quickly to counter." Chen flipped to a new screen. "He's also leveraging your father's debt, calling the entire $17 million loan due now." A knot of ice tightened in Adriana's gut. "My father can't cover that." "We're aware. That's the point. Lucian intends to ruin your family to force your return." "That will not be happening," Ethan stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "He hasn't grasped that yet. He's operating as if he still holds all the cards." Chen fixed her gaze on Adriana. "He's banking on you prioritizing their safety over yours, that you would sacrifice your liberty to protect them." The assessment was brutally accurate. 3 hours earlier, Adriana would have taken that bargain. It was the role she'd been groomed for her entire life. That sense of obligation had been a crushing weight for months. But everything shifted when she discovered him with Isabella. His response to being caught was not shame, but irritation, telling her that her sole purpose was to obey. "Are they truly safe? My family?" Adriana asked. "They're at a protected facility in Wisconsin, extremely isolated, protected by private security, entirely off the grid. They will remain there until Lucian is detained." "And how long will that take?" Chen's face grew stern. "Therein lies the problem. Our case is solid, but Lucian employs a top-tier legal team. They are already submitting motions alleging harassment and unlawful searches. Without a counteroffensive, they could stall this in the courts for months. Our strategy, therefore, is to strike back with more force. We need additional witnesses to trace his finances and to ensure you remain solvent." Chen rose. "Which brings us to the next phase. Remaining in Chicago is impossible." The statement struck Adriana like a physical blow. "What?" "Lucian's influence is sunk too deep into this city's foundations. Too many officials are on his payroll. Police, judges, city leaders. We can protect you, but not on his territory." A map illuminated Chen's tablet. "We have a secure location in Colorado, a secluded mountain estate with its own security detail. You'll be relocated there until this is settled." "For how long?" 6 months, potentially longer. Half a year. Living in hiding like a criminal while Lucian roamed free, planning his vengeance. Adriana turned to Ethan. "You have a major corporation to run. You can't just vanish for 6 months." "I can manage it from a distance," he replied. "Marcus and my senior staff can oversee day-to-day matters. Frankly, my absence is the best thing for my company at this moment. My being visible would only hand Lucian more ammunition to use." Chen nodded. "He has already begun a media assault. planting a fabricated story of infidelity with the press, casting himself as the wronged party. By morning, you will be painted as the villain in every publication. Adriana had expected it, but the reality was still a gut punch. So, I am to remain hidden while he manipulates the entire narrative? You are to remain alive while we assemble a case to put him away permanently, Chen countered. Yes, it's terrible, but staying alive is the priority over justice for now. The agent left an hour later with a promise of daily updates. Marcus stationed himself outside the entrance, and then Adriana and Ethan were left in silence. A heavy silence filled the penthouse. Adriana moved to the vast windows that looked out over the city, a carpet of 1,000,000 glittering lights, so many ordinary people with ordinary lives, while hers had just imploded. I need to change out of this dress, she murmured. I had my assistant pick up some things for you there in the bedroom. She gave him a sharp glance, and he quickly clarified, Only the basics. I made no assumptions. It's all right. Her gaze returned to the city. You've considered everything. I did my best. Why? The question escaped her, sharper than intended. Why go through all this? You hardly know who I am. Ethan paused for a moment before delivering the blow. When I was 12, my father hospitalized my mother. She had fractured ribs, a broken jaw, and internal bleeding. He claimed she'd fallen down a flight of stairs, and she corroborated his story, petrified of the consequences if she refused. Adriana turned, her eyes fixed on his. She remained with him for another 8 years, Ethan continued. 8 years of treading carefully, making herself smaller, convinced that she was somehow worthy of the pain. When she finally found the courage to leave, I was already at university. I returned home for the holidays and barely knew the woman I saw. She was skeletal. She recoiled when I tried to embrace her. His jaw clenched. I asked her why she endured it for so long. She said she felt completely trapped, that she was certain no one would ever intervene. So this is what you do. You rescue women in my position. I help anyone who feels caged when I'm able, he replied, his gaze locking with hers. And at that party, I saw a soul at its breaking point, fighting to seem whole while you were shattering inside. Adriana wanted to deny his words, to raise a wall, but she was too weary for another lie. I truly thought I could handle him. I made myself believe. I'm not even sure what fiction I told myself. That marriage would mend him, that I could somehow repair all that ruin. He was never going to be repaired. Men like Lucian are wired for destruction. I see that now. Do you? Ethan's tone was gentle but sharp. Because the second guessing is about to begin. The doubt is coming for you. You'll start to wonder if you made a terrible mistake, if you blew it all out of proportion, if you should have just seen it through. No, I will not. Yes, you will, because that is how trauma works. It erodes your faith in your own mind. He moved closer, not to invade her space, but to close the gap. So I am telling you now, while you are clear, you made the only choice you had. Marrying him would have been a slow death of the spirit. He would have dismantled you piece by piece. A knot formed in her throat. His conviction was absolute. I watched my own mother fade into nothing. I will not stand by and see that happen again if I can prevent it. She knew she owed him gratitude, that she had to voice her thanks for the insane chance he'd taken. But any thank you felt pitiful against the scale of what he had done. Instead, she just voiced the stark reality. We are actually married. Legally, yes, that detail was not part of the initial plan. Ethan's expression was unreadable. No. The first plan was a quiet affair at City Hall with only the required attendees. But your text this morning made it clear Lucian would challenge any private arrangement. He'd claim coercion and have it annulled. The only way to make it airtight was a public spectacle, before 100 witnesses, at his own gathering. A heavy silence passed. I neglected to ask if you were okay with that. My error. Do not apologize. Adriana's gaze fell to her left hand, to the ring Ethan placed there, an understated band of white gold, elegant, nothing like the ostentatious diamond from Lucian she'd abandoned on a nightstand. You gave me a way out. Nothing else is important. This is a real marriage, Adriana. It is 100% legitimate. If you decide to end it, we'll require a legal divorce. I understand completely. And let me be perfectly clear, I have zero other expectations. This is solely for your protection. You will have your own room, your own privacy. I will not. He paused, seeking the right word. I will not make things difficult. She observed him. This man who had just set his own life on fire for a stranger, inviting a monster's wrath, risking his empire, and marrying a woman he didn't know, just to ensure her safety. So why have you never been married? The question slipped out unbidden. You're wealthy, successful, and you possess a conscience. One would assume you'd be taken. A faint smile touched his lips but failed to reach his eyes. I was engaged once 5 years ago to Jennifer. We were together since college. What happened? She required a partner who was more available, someone who would prioritize her over his career. I believed I could be that man, but my choices proved otherwise, so she left. He gave a small, rehearsed shrug, but Adriana noticed how rigid his posture was. It was for the best, truly. I am terrible at relationships. And yet, here you are, married to me. This is an entirely different situation, is it not? It is, because you are not required to love me. Ethan laid out the terms bluntly. Her one and only job was to remain alive. His voice was clinical. Once Lucian faced conviction, he clarified, their agreement was nullified and she would be free of all obligation. The entire speech was intended as a comfort, yet it only made Adriana feel like a problem to be solved and then set aside, a feeling she promptly suppressed. I need to change out of this, she said. The bedroom was immense and sterile, all shades of tan and charcoal. The clothes Ethan had arranged for her, simple, perfectly tailored basics, were laid across the bed. His assistant was terrifyingly thorough. Adriana struggled with her dress for a moment before she gave up and called to him from the doorway. I can't reach the zipper. He entered cautiously, his eyes deliberately averted from her. His fingers on her back were swift and impersonal, the contact purely mechanical. As the gown fell loose, Adriana took her first profound breath in what felt like a lifetime. I appreciate that. Of course. He backed away toward the door. I'll be in the main living area if you need anything at all. The moment the door clicked shut, Adriana faced herself in the mirror. The physical cost of the stress was unavoidable. She was far too thin, her ribs prominent, and the dark circles under her eyes were deeper than any makeup could conceal. She appeared like a person being slowly erased from a photograph. Adriana slipped into the plain clothes, bound her hair back, and wiped away every trace of makeup. Stripped of the party's glamour, she looked younger, more like herself. When she returned to the living room, she saw Ethan engrossed in his laptop. He looked up. Any developments? Nothing yet, she replied, sinking into a chair across from him. What is the strategy for tomorrow? We depart before the news vans can swarm this building. After that, we disappear in Colorado. The feds are directing things. We are effectively ghosts now. He snapped the laptop closed. That is not the answer you were looking for. I just need this all to be over. I know. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. On autopilot, she retrieved it, the screen instantly exploding with notifications. Texts from unknown numbers, messages from reporters, direct messages from colleagues. A few were pitiful, the majority were utterly baffled. One message from Isabella cut through the noise. You have burned everything to the ground. I hope you are satisfied. Adriana deleted the message without a word. A new one appeared from Sophia. Mom is weeping nonstop. Dad is in a daze, but we are secure. Agent Chen's team is legitimate. Are you okay? Adriana typed a response. I'm safe. Tell Mom I am so sorry, Sophia replied instantly. Do not be sorry. You did what you had to. I am so incredibly proud of you. That single phrase, I am so incredibly proud of you, struck her like a physical blow. She set the phone down, fighting back a sudden tide of tears. Your sister? Ethan asked. Yes, she says my mother is a wreck. Give her time. Parents sometimes need a moment to process. My father made a pact with Lucian. He traded me to rescue his company. I just violated that pact. Adriana's voice was utterly flat, drained of all emotion. He will never forgive me for this. Then the man is a fool. He is a man who was desperate. It's different. No, Ethan countered, his voice like flint. It is not. Desperation does not remove your choices. Your father chose to use you as collateral. He had other options, including bankruptcy or asking for help or a dozen other actions that didn't involve selling his daughter to a criminal. Stop defending him. The urge to argue back rose within Adriana, but the stark truth was that she had been rationalizing her father's actions for months, weaving a narrative about duty to obscure the cold, ugly bargain. The entire thing was a lie. I am just so tired, she whispered. You need to sleep. We have a long journey ahead of us tomorrow. She stood up, but then paused. Ethan, seriously, thank you. For everything, I know I have not said it adequately. Don't mention it. No, I insist. She looked him directly in the eye. You have risked your business, your reputation, your entire life. For that, I am grateful. He gave a curt nod, visibly uncomfortable with the direct acknowledgement. Just stay alive. That will be all the thanks I require. Adriana went to her room, but sleep was an impossibility. She lay in the complete darkness, listening to the city's hum, her mind replaying the unbelievable chain of events. Just 24 hours ago, she was preparing to marry Lucian. Now she was bound to a different man, a fugitive and a key witness. Her phone buzzed again. A blocked number. She hesitated, but some dark impulse compelled her to accept the call. Adriana. Lucian's voice was smooth, unnervingly calm. We need to talk. Her heart hammered against her ribs. How did you obtain this number? I obtain whatever I desire. You, more than anyone, should know that. He allowed the silence to stretch, thick and menacing. You created quite a disturbance today. You were with my cousin on our wedding day. Isabella is irrelevant. I made that perfectly clear. And I am simply expected to accept that. You are expected to understand the way the world functions. His voice hardened. Men like me take what we want. That is the rule you were raised with. Well, I am no longer playing by those rules. Lucian let out a cold, sharp laugh. You believe marrying some wealthy hero changes the equation, that the federal government can actually protect you? Adriana, you are mine. You will always be mine when you finally accept that, and you will. I might consider taking you back if you plead with enough sincerity. I will not plead. I am not coming back, and I will dedicate my life to seeing you rot inside a prison cell. Such large, courageous words. We shall see how long they sustain you. His tone shifted, becoming disturbingly casual. Your father called me. He is deeply concerned about his financial state. I told him not to worry. I would be willing to forgive the entire debt if you would just come home. I am not coming home. Then I will ruin him. His company, his name, everything. Your family will be destroyed. Your mother will be on the streets. Your sister will be removed from her school. All because you decided to be selfish. A tremor began to shake Adriana's hands. That sounds like a threat to my family. No, that's a description of consequences. Every action has a reaction, Adriana. She gambled on a bluff about federal agents listening, a play he saw through instantly. They are not. I'm not that careless. And even if they were, what crime has been committed? I'm just a concerned man asking his bride to come home. Your ex-fiancé. I'm married now. A hollow formality. You feel nothing for Ethan Caldwell, nor he for you. It's a contract, same as ours was. Only my contract had superior clauses. Superior? You mean the one making me your possession? I mean the one that kept you protected and made your family wealthy? His voice lowered, a predator's whisper. I would have given you a flawless existence, Adriana. A perfect world. Your only task was to obey. I don't want a perfect world if the price is my own soul. Then you are an even greater fool than I imagined. The manufactured charm vanished. You have 1 week. Return to me, offer your apology, and we can erase this unfortunate episode. I am even prepared to forgive the public disgrace. After 1 week, my offer expires, and from that point on, my sole ambition will be to turn everything you treasure into ash. The connection severed. Adriana stood trembling in the gloom, the phone still pressed to her ear. 7 days to decide between her own life and her family's utter destruction. She emerged from the bedroom to find Ethan absorbed in a dense legal file. Lucian called, she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. His eyes snapped up. Tell me everything. She recounted the entire conversation. The ultimatum, the impossible choice, the 7-day countdown. Before she finished, Ethan was already dialing Agent Chen. The family requires immediate extraction, he stated coldly. Right now, Lucian has issued a direct threat. Following a brief, strained conversation, he ended the call and met Adriana's gaze. Chen's team is moving your family as we speak. Lucian will not be able to reach them. He knows my new number. That is a superficial issue. A number can be discarded. A federal safe house is a fortress. He dragged a hand through his hair. I knew he would try something like this. He was always going to use them for leverage. He gave me a week to return to him. You are not going anywhere, Ethan retorted, his tone absolute. Your family is being shielded from this conflict. I give you my word, Adriana, they will not be harmed. His voice was ironclad with conviction. Lucian will not prevail with intimidation. Adriana struggled to believe his certainty. She knew Lucian's empire, the way he controlled entire city districts while the police looked away. His influence was etched into the city's very foundation. What if the Bureau's protection fails? She asked, her voice barely audible. Then we neutralize him first. Ethan opened his laptop, revealing a screen teeming with files. Chen granted me complete access to their case file on him. financial records, witness statements. I'll show you the arsenal they've assembled. For the following hour, he detailed the entire investigation. Lucian's enterprise was vast. They had evidence of money laundering, racketeering, and extortion, along with compelling links to 3 unsolved homicides. The case was strong, yet it had vulnerabilities. It required witnesses willing to testify and an airtight paper trail to establish motive and opportunity. "How long have you been involved in this?" Adriana asked. "I began investigating the day after we first met. Once I understood what Lucian was, inaction was not an option. Most people would have turned a blind eye. Most people didn't spend 8 years of their life watching their mother endure a beating." His tone was utterly factual. "I told you I intervene when I'm able. This was such a time." Adriana stared at the data displayed on the screen. "Is all this enough?" "It's not a guarantee, but we will make it one." Her phone buzzed on the table. An unrecognized number. She ignored it. "Likely a reporter," Ethan surmised. "The news is out. Mob boss left at the altar. You're on the verge of becoming infamous." "I have no desire to be infamous." "Then stay away from the press." He shut the laptop. "You need to get some rest. We have to be gone from here by 5. But sleep was an impossible luxury. Adriana lay awake, tracing the shadows on the ceiling, Lucian's voice a chilling echo in her mind, his profound certainty that she would come crawling back. She imagined her father pacing inside a safe house, cursing her name. She pictured her mother in tears, pleading with God. She thought of Sophia, the one person who might understand, and she thought of her cousin, Isabella, whose fixation on Adriana's fiancé had driven her to sacrifice everything for a hollow moment with a monster. Adriana's screen flared with one last message from a burner account. "You were beautiful today. A shame you wasted it on the wrong man. I will be seeing you soon. L." A wave of cold terror washed through her. Lucian was observing her. He had eyes on her in that very moment. She rose and saw Ethan asleep on the sofa, his laptop still on. She gently touched his shoulder. "Lucian sent another text," she said as his eyes opened. "He is watching us." Ethan's expression hardened into granite as he read the message. "Marcus," he called out. His head of security appeared instantly. "Sir." "Initiate a full lockdown protocol. No one enters or leaves, and I need a complete electronic sweep of this entire residence." Ethan faced her, his tone grave. "Gather your things. We leave tonight." "But you said—" "That plan is obsolete. If Lucian knows our position, we cannot remain here." He was already in motion, pulling out bags, stuffing them with clothes. "We will drive through the night. We'll reach Colorado before he can retaliate." "What about my family?" "Chen is already managing them. They will remain secure." He paused, his gaze fixed on hers. "Trust me." Adriana gave a sharp, tense nod. There was no other choice. They were gone in under 30 minutes. Marcus drove as Ethan worked on encrypted devices. From the back seat, Adriana watched Chicago diminish on the horizon, its glow swallowed by the relentless highway. Before them lay only darkness, mountains, and a vast emptiness. It was either the path to freedom or simply a more expansive cage. Adriana reread Lucian's message a final time. "I will see you soon." Not if she could stop it. Never again. She deleted the message and turned off the phone. Then she closed her eyes, trying to envision what freedom felt like, and wondered if she would ever know it again. The Colorado safe house sat at the terminus of a dirt path that snaked 3 miles into a dense pine forest. As they pulled up, dawn was painting the mountains in hues of golden rose. It might have been breathtaking had Adriana been capable of seeing its beauty. She climbed from the car, her body stiff from the 12-hour journey, and surveyed her new prison. The safe house was far more sophisticated than she had expected. It had the facade of a rustic lodge, but was a modern bastion with panoramic windows that looked out on a deserted valley. It was powered by solar arrays and had a covert security system concealed as a simple fence. As Marcus performed a security check, Ethan led her inside, his hand resting securely on her arm. "When did you last sleep?" he asked. "I honestly cannot recall." "The bedroom is upstairs. First door to your right," he instructed, gesturing. "I'll let you know when dinner is made." She offered no resistance. The room was sparse, log-paneled walls, a quilt that appeared handmade, and curtains that completely eclipsed the sun. Adriana toed off her shoes and collapsed onto the bed, fully clothed, falling into an immediate deep sleep. When she finally stirred, the world outside was pitch black. The clock displayed 8:15. She had been unconscious for nearly 12 hours. Her mouth was dry with the taste of stale coffee and poor choices. Downstairs, Ethan was surrounded by a fortress of laptops and documents. He barely looked up as she entered. "There's food in the refrigerator. Help yourself." Adriana took out some leftover pasta and consumed it cold, not bothering with the microwave. "Is there any news?" she asked. "Your family is safe in the new location. Chen reports they are mostly cooperative. Your father is still agitated, but not acting irrationally." Ethan swiveled a laptop to show her the screen. "And Lucian has already made his countermove." A news banner dominated the display. "Billionaire CEO accused of corporate espionage." Beneath it, another headline: "Caldwell Ventures stock plummets 15% amid scandal." "He's targeting my company," Adriana breathed. A standard smear tactic, fabricated articles, paid media, and a few disloyal board members creating chaos. Ethan's voice was level, but she noticed the tension etched in his shoulders. "It's a crude strategy, but effective. If I remain silent, the lies will take root. If I issue a denial, I appear guilty." "So, what is your plan?" "Nothing. We will allow him to overextend. The more aggressive his attacks, the more desperate he seems, and desperate men are prone to error." He then opened a different file. "Chen's unit has already raided 2 of his warehouses, seizing enough illicit goods for federal indictments. Lucian's legal team is scrambling, but he remains at large." "For the time being," she corrected. "The gears of justice move slowly, especially when you have the resources to obstruct them," Ethan said, closing the laptop. "How are you feeling?" "I was unconscious for 12 hours. "Right. Good point." He stood and moved toward the coffee machine. Marcus discovered a tracking device on the vehicle. We don't know when it was attached, but it has been transmitting for at least 48 hours. Adriana felt her stomach clench. "Which means Lucian heard everything." "That is a near certainty. It means he knows we are in Colorado, though not our precise location. Chen is conducting a sweep of the entire region to ensure he has no operatives nearby." He poured 2 mugs of coffee, handing one to her. "We must be even more cautious now." "More cautious than hiding out in a mountain stronghold?" "More cautious about our words, even in private. We must operate under the assumption we are always being monitored until we can confirm that we are not." Model. The thought alone felt like a violation. Lucian's shadow stretched even here, hundreds of miles from Chicago, mocking their so-called safety. She drank her coffee, banishing images of his listening devices. Ethan's secure phone buzzed. A text from Sophia. Mom's tears have stopped. Father is handling the lawyers, the financial ruin. Are you all right? Adriana's fingers typed the truth. Breathing? Worn out? Let Mother know I'm okay. Sophia's response was immediate. She can't speak with you right now. I'm sorry. The message cut deeper than it should have. She set the phone down, her gaze lost in the cup. She'll come around, Ethan murmured, reading the pain on her face. Loyalty isn't owed when a child is treated as a commodity, an asset to be bartered. A harsh truth, but a truth nonetheless. Ethan understood this intimately. His own mother vanished for 6 months after leaving his father, cloaked in shame for all she had endured and overcome. He said her healing began the moment she knew her son held no resentment. They speak weekly now. His mother, a survivor, remade herself, now saving others in Seattle. A faint smile betrays his pride. As for his father, his death 5 years ago was a footnote. Ethan didn't even attend the service. His detachment speaks volumes, a testament to wounds that never truly close. The parallel struck Adriana with force, conjuring her own father's expression. Not joy at her engagement to Lucian, but relief. She wasn't a daughter finding love. She was collateral, her future settling his disastrous accounts. Her soft admission of her father's betrayal was shattered by an imminent danger. A voice crackled over the radio. Marcus reporting 2 vehicles closing in at speed. A warning flare. Federal? Ethan asked instantly, but Marcus's trained eye saw no official procedure in their approach. Marcus was already armed. The order was unspoken but absolute. The safe room. Now. Adriana's first impulse was defiance, a weary refusal to be corralled again. But Ethan's tone was final, extinguishing any argument. Behind the bookshelf lay a steel cage, a modern bunker with screens, her only window to the coming storm. His final command was not a request, but a lifeline, a rehearsed plan for her survival. Her protest withered under the gravity of his stare. A silent pact of obedience was sealed between them. The bookshelf slid closed with a heavy thud, the sound of a vault door locking her inside a purpose-built grave. The 8-by-10-foot space hummed with cold technology, a strange counterpoint to the storm in her chest. Her world shrank to the glowing security screen. 2 black SUVs, 4 men in combat attire. Their fluid, predatory movements told her everything. Not government agents, but Lucian's personal soldiers. On the monitor, defenses were in place, Marcus securing the entrance, Ethan on comms with Chen. The invaders remained outside, a portrait of disciplined menace. Then, the assault turned inward. A call buzzed from the gate, and simultaneously, Adriana's own phone screamed, breaking the tomb-like silence. She accepted the call. An unfamiliar voice, one of Lucian's pawns, offered to bring her home. Her reply was a sliver of ice. I am home. It was pure rebellion. His talk of a pardon was a hollow gesture, a prize for her surrender, disguised as an act of mercy. The facade of civility dissolved, revealing the raw ultimatum: surrender or suffer. Adriana played her only card, her protected federal status. The answer was a hollow laugh, a cold truth that her sanctuary was no longer sacred and that their waiting was just another form of attack. The line went dead, leaving an unspoken promise of a long, patient siege. On screen, the soldiers fanned out, methodically sealing every escape route. The trap was set. Then her phone lit up, bearing Ethan's name, pulling her back from the edge of a dark spiral. She relayed the enemy's demands. Ethan's reply was forged from steel. Returning to Lucian was not an option. Reinforcements were 40 minutes away. Their sole objective was to survive until then. He and Marcus were the only line of defense between her and the wolves. He commanded her to remain sealed inside, a powerless spectator to the impending violence. It was a breathless wait between hunter and hunted. Adriana stared at the monitors, watching them circle until a hand lifted a radio to its mouth. The game was over. A brief transmission, a hand gesturing toward the house, and the world plunged into darkness. The screens died, leaving her blind until crimson emergency lights bathed the room in a hellish glow. And in that moment, true fear took root, the chilling knowledge that her fortress was a trap designed from plans they already possessed. The heavy impact of boots on the floor above was a sound too close, a sign the outer defenses had fallen. A call to Chen confirmed the breach, his reply disarmingly serene. "I'm aware." He was watching it all unfold on satellite. Help was 20 minutes out. The command remained the same: do not move. Chen's sterile mention of Ethan and Marcus, adhering to protocol, offered no solace. Every fiber of her being screamed to flee. Distant sounds of struggle, voices, bodies hitting walls, a single sharp crack of a gun fueled her rising terror. It felt like a repossession, a violent reclaiming of property. A single screen, powered by its own battery, flickered on. It revealed two of Lucian's men clearing the living room, rifles poised. A voice on their comms reported the asset was missing, a cold label that erased her personhood. Then she heard them. Footsteps drawing nearer. The steps halted just beyond the study, just beyond her concealed door. On the screen, she saw a soldier enter and move directly to the bookshelf. It wasn't a search. It was an approach. He knew her precise location. His fingers began to probe for the hidden release mechanism. The mechanism refused to yield. He spoke into his radio, reporting her location, then prepared to force his way in. 2 shots tore into the lock. Wood splintered, but the reinforced door held firm. Adriana, shaking, scanned the room for anything to use against a bullet. He began to slam his shoulder into the bookshelf. The soldier was mid-swing, trying to brute force the entrance, when Marcus's voice cut through the air, a sharp command to freeze. On screen, the man turned, but not nearly fast enough. 2 precise shots to the torso, and the threat was gone. "Clear," Marcus reported over the comms. His report was ice. 1 eliminated, hunting the others. 3 invaders were still unaccounted for, and Ethan was gone from her view. Then the sound of breaking glass and 3 quick shots from upstairs. A thick, chilling silence followed. Adriana pressed her ear against the door, met only by nothingness. In the stillness, her own pulse was a deafening drum. 5 minutes felt like an hour, then 10, each second elongated by the crimson emergency light. A low, grinding sound broke the silence. The bookshelf was moving. She grabbed a fire extinguisher, her only weapon, as a silhouette filled the doorway. It was Ethan, looking as if he'd walked through fire. His shirt was dark with blood, a fresh cut bleeding above his eye. He told her they were safe, dismissing her concern for his wounds. As he guided her out, Chen's tactical unit swept in, securing the battlefield that was once a home. Adriana moved through the wreckage, deliberately averting her eyes from the bodies being carried away. Agent Chen's composure wavered slightly as he verified she was physically safe. Her quiet response, "Define unharmed," spoke volumes. He simply nodded, then outlined the procedure for the captured men. They would throw a litany of federal charges at the prisoners, hoping one would break. It was a simple wager. Did they fear prison more than they feared Lucian? In that moment, Chen's radio came alive. This location was compromised. Adriana had to be moved, and it had to be now. Their destination was another fortress, deeper in isolation. But to Adriana, it was merely a different kind of cage. A crushing wave of hopelessness washed over her. This wasn't protection. It was an escalation, the next stage of a life in flight from a man whose reach seemed infinite. "There must be another option," she begged, her voice fracturing. She wanted to know how long this life would last, and the answer was as cold as iron, until their case against him was unbreakable. Her request for a time frame was met with a silence more telling than any words. It was a life sentence. Ethan's hand on her arm was a small anchor, but it was the stark image of the body bags outside that made her decision for her. She consented. The evacuation was swift, detached. As their vehicle prepared to leave, her phone vibrated. She recognized the number immediately. Driven by an impulse she could not name, she answered. Her greeting to Lucian was devoid of any feeling. He began his assault at once, distorting the truth, insisting his men were meant to be careful. He was blaming her for their deaths. It was a classic, cruel manipulation. He invoked the families of his fallen soldiers, a pathetic attempt at guilt. "You put them there," she countered, refusing his trap. He vowed to resolve this, mocking her liberty and casting himself as the patient hunter, waiting for her to make one mistake. "Then you're in for a very long wait," she answered. A heavy silence passed. Then he changed his approach, asking about the gash above Ethan's eye. It was a piece of information he could only have if he'd been watching. The threat was unmistakable, aimed directly at the man who stood by her side. A chilling awareness settled into her soul. "You're watching us," she breathed. His reply, "I am always watching," revealed a level of surveillance so absolute they had never imagined it. Before the line went dead, he left her with a terrifying image of a world where she would never again be unseen. "We need to go now," Ethan insisted, his voice tight. As the car tore into the darkness, a crushing hopelessness enveloped Adriana. This was not a flight toward freedom, it was merely a transfer, exchanging one cage for another walled with pure terror. Their new refuge was a mountain fortress, a concrete bunker reached only by a perilous winding road. "Only Chen's most trusted circle knows this place exists," Marcus said, his words a thin attempt at reassurance. This so-called sanctuary was a ghost, wiped from every map and grid. Adriana was silent, all hope seemingly drained from her. Inside, Ethan began a frantic sweep for listening devices, finding 3 as Marcus methodically crushed each one under her vacant stare. The discovery confirmed a grim reality. The bugs were planted in advance. Chen's operation had been compromised. Marcus theorized it was outside help. Hiding her face, Adriana whispered, asking when it would end. Ethan's soft reply, "It will," felt like a promise made of smoke. Their strategy, it was clear, had to evolve. "What strategy?" Adriana shot back, her voice dripping with cynicism. "We hide. He hunts." That was the sum of their existence. But Ethan declared they were finished being the prey. They now possessed their own weapons, evidence and sworn testimony. The new approach was sheer aggression, to leak every damning piece of information they possessed to the world. The goal was to ignite a media inferno so powerful that even a man like Lucian could not survive it. Agent Chen, having just arrived, dismissed it out of hand. "A disastrous strategy," she pronounced. Chen warned Lucian's lawyers would frame it as a desperate smear campaign. Ethan contended the court of public opinion was their last hope for justice. He believed complete transparency would shatter Lucian's power base, leaving him utterly exposed. Chen countered that an isolated Lucian would become more unpredictable, a cornered beast. Adriana's quiet but firm voice cut through. they were already trapped with that beast, she noted. This way, at least, she said. We are finally fighting. Chen asked if she was sure. She was not. Though doubt consumed her, being Lucian's quarry had forged her resolve into something hard. Projecting a confidence she didn't feel, she gave the approval. Chen conceded, but established her terms. A vetted journalist would receive the leak, and every action had to be coordinated with federal prosecutors. The action had to be perceived as justice, not revenge. Ethan had a candidate in mind, a reporter renowned for toppling Chicago's most untouchable figures. The lure of such an explosive exclusive would be irresistible. Chen sanctioned the meeting under one condition: no electronics, face-to-face only. The meeting was scheduled for 3 days later in a diner, neutral ground, 2 hours outside the city. The journalist, Rebecca Torres, demonstrated her expertise by arriving early, claiming a booth in a poorly lit corner. Adriana noted her unexpected youth and her intensely sharp gaze. As they approached, Rebecca's expression was unreadable. Her first words were a calculated probe. "You must be the runaway bride." Adriana simply confirmed it was the media's label. Rebecca then listed other tabloid titles, underscoring the gulf between public fiction and their reality. "I need the truth," she stated plainly. Adriana then recounted the entire nightmare, from the forced engagement to her life as a fugitive from Lucian. Rebecca listened with profound stillness, absorbing every word like a seasoned analyst. When Adriana concluded, Rebecca acknowledged the story's power, but drew a firm line between emotion and evidence. She then faced Ethan, asking about the proof he'd offered. He produced a data drive containing financial records and testimony that chronicled a 5-year criminal operation. Rebecca accepted the drive, but made no move to examine it, articulating the mortal danger posed by a man like Lucian Moretti. She needed absolute confirmation the data was legitimate. Just then, Agent Chen stepped from a darkened alcove, revealing her presence. "It's legitimate," she confirmed. The FBI had already authenticated the drive's contents. Rebecca was visibly stunned for a moment at the Bureau's overt participation. Chen clarified that the legal system was too slow to address the immediate threat against Adriana. This was a media play to force the endgame. Adriana stated that she accepted the colossal risk. Rebecca pushed one last time, needing to know why she would run toward the storm. "Because hiding isn't living," Adriana answered, defining the act as reclaiming her existence. That was what Rebecca needed to hear. She was committed. The journalist had a final stipulation. Adriana had to use her real name to give the story its greatest impact. A cold shock coursed through Adriana. This singular act would obliterate her anonymity and paint a clear target on her back for Lucian. This was her sole chance to command the narrative, to tell her own story. "I'll do it," she affirmed. The interview that came next was a grueling 3 hours, as Rebecca delved deep into her history with Lucian, examining every psychological fracture. Through it all, Adriana's voice never faltered, displaying an impossible calm under pressure. Afterwards, Rebecca delivered the timeline. The story would publish in 48 hours, with no chance of recall. When asked if she was ready, Adriana simply said, "No, but it makes no difference." A small smile touched Rebecca's lips as she noted that the greatest stories are always about terrified people fighting for what is right. The moment she was gone, Adriana collapsed from the strain. As Ethan and Chen handled the logistics, his quiet voice broke the silence. "That was beyond brave. I feel like I just launched a flare for him to find me," she whispered. Ethan conceded it was an enormous gamble but called it a decisive move, stripping Lucian of his primary weapons. her fear, and his version of the truth. He placed his hand over hers in a silent show of solidarity. But the comfort vanished as Lucian's vows echoed in her mind. The next 48 hours were a waking nightmare fueled by pure anxiety, devoid of sleep or sustenance. The moment the article went live, the internet shattered. Entitled, "The Woman Who Said No," Rebecca's piece was an explosive exposé, fortified with cold, hard evidence. Within hours, it had saturated every social media feed, forcing major news networks to convene legal experts to analyze the ensuing chaos. The public revelation sent Lucian's empire into a terminal decline. Political allies publicly denounced him, and business partners severed all connections. His financial dynasty, a cover for his criminal activities, began to dissolve under the weight of global scrutiny. Lucian himself, however, was far from beaten. He struck back in under 24 hours, launching cyber attacks on Ethan's company, sending threats to Adriana's family, and leaking the location of their safe house. Chen's new analysis, Lucian was officially unhinged. He began to broadcast his threats publicly, a definitive sign his sanity had frayed completely. When Adriana asked if he was cornered or simply plotting, Chen replied it was both. That night, sleep was a fantasy, as Adriana was tormented by the thought that she might never be free of him. Ethan found her staring into the darkness of their room. She displayed all the signs of profound trauma, haunted by shadows and the memory of his voice. She asked if they would ever be done running. Ethan's reply, "Then we run together," forged their shared struggle into an unbreakable bond. The overwhelming relief that he would not forsake her granted Adriana a fleeting calm. She looked at him, the man who had walked into this fire, who had sworn to protect her, who had endured so much for her sake. He could have left 1,000 times, but his loyalty had become her anchor. "Why are you doing this?" she asked him, her voice soft. "What keeps you here?" After a long pause, Ethan began to speak of a debt to his mother, then stopped. His voice was raw when he continued. "Because you deserved to be more than a prize for Lucian to claim." Her reply, "I don't deserve you," revealed the true depth of her brokenness. "You just have to let yourself be," he told her, his gaze direct. "You're far more resilient than you know." He reframed her entire escape not as an act of fear, but as one of immense strength, abandoning a gilded cage for the terrifying unknown, a choice he said few would ever have the courage to make. She felt tears well in her eyes. Adriana confessed she felt only terror, not bravery. But she was beginning to understand that courage is just functioning while gripped by fear, a familiar truth for survivors of trauma. The dark forest outside was a perfect mirror of her fear of Lucian. Ethan's presence was the only thing keeping her intact. Whatever fragile sense of security they had constructed was instantly vaporized. A message arrived at 3 a.m, 2 weeks after Rebecca's article had dropped. Adriana, hovering on the edge of sleep, was jolted awake by her phone's glow. It was Chen. The text heralded a new stage of the war. One of Lucian's highest-ranking men had turned informant. The defector wanted federal protection in return for everything he knew. For a brief moment, a wave of hope washed over Adriana, but the strain in Chen's voice on the phone crushed it immediately. Lucian had ordered a hit, but the target was not her, it was Ethan. The plan was twisted and cruel, to dismantle her life, piece by agonizing piece. The source's intel was a blade of ice. The strike was coming inside of 48 hours. Beside her, Ethan heard it all on speaker, his expression hardening into stone. He demanded a name for the phantom coming for them, but their contact only knew a specialist was inbound. Chen's order was sharp and immediate. They had to separate. Her strategy was sound. 2 targets moving apart are harder to corner than one. Yet Ethan's rejection was swift and final, an absolute refusal to be parted from her. He saw it as a tactical error that would hand Lucian a psychological victory, a way to divide and conquer them. His hand closed over hers, a silent, unbreakable vow. Chen yielded, instead ordering a complete lockdown and reinforcing their defenses. When the call ended, a heavy silence consumed the room. That formless danger now had a deadline, a 48-hour pulse. Adriana gave voice to the despair, whispering that Lucian's hunt would be relentless until he claimed his prize. Ethan countered her dark certainty, insisting they had to seize the offensive. But Adriana's hope had curdled into a bitter poison. She had witnessed Lucian twist the law into a weapon too many times. Her voice rising, she declared the entire system was his puppet, so Ethan suggested they abandon the system entirely. Rising to his feet, Ethan claimed the informant's word was the final piece of leverage they held. Adriana countered that Lucian would simply silence the man before he ever spoke. Ethan's new strategy was ruthless: leak the testimony to the world now, rendering the informant's murder a pointless act of cruelty. Their objective had pivoted from exposing Lucian's individual crimes to dismantling the very architecture of his power. The initial article had been insufficient. Lucian's attorneys had masterfully painted it as libel, preying on the public's capacity for doubt. "There is no spinning this," Ethan vowed, his voice a low and dangerous current. He detailed the new offensive: a live broadcast, a raw, unfiltered data release, and the informant's unvarnished story, a digital tremor meant to shatter any defense. But a deep chill settled in Adriana. Lucian was a creature who wrote his own rules. "If this is how we fall," Ethan had sworn, "we will fall in a blaze of defiance, not huddled in the dark." The conviction in his voice ignited a familiar courage in Adriana, reminding her of the pillar he had been in a crisis past. He was her anchor in the maelstrom, a force of nature that was both awesome and terrifying. Adriana's quiet nod was all the confirmation he needed. The following 24 hours were a whirlwind of calculated chaos. Chen coerced a hesitant U.S. attorney into an alliance, timing new warrants to their media assault, as Rebecca managed the press and secured the venue. Their key witness, Vincent Delgado, the architect of Lucian's finances for 2 decades, was relocated to a secure location. When Adriana finally met him, she found a pale, exhausted man in his 50s, haunted by a conscience he had long thought buried. She had to know what had finally broken him after so many years of complicity. His gaze fixed on the floor, Vincent confessed that Lucian had issued a command that violated even his own decayed sense of morality. He could launder fortunes, but arranging the elimination of her husband was a service he refused to provide. "That was the final line," he stated plainly. Murder, he reasoned, was an unacceptable price for a shattered ego. He admitted to concealing 3 prior deaths, dismissing them as the cost of doing business. But this was an intimate act of violence, born of pure, narcissistic fury. His dark, hollow eyes at last lifted to meet hers. He spoke of Lucian's fixation, a sickness that fed on public humiliation and an insatiable hunger for respect. A wave of pure terror washed over Adriana as he described Lucian's oath to not just possess her, but to methodically dismantle her happiness. Vincent's tone turned to ice as he warned her that Lucian was liquidating assets, preparing for some final, terrible act of vengeance. Ethan interjected, declaring that their plan for the next day was the final strike, and Vincent was the tip of the spear. The informant gave a slow, tired nod. "I'll do it," he consented, but cautioned that Lucian had law enforcement on his payroll. The blowback would be immediate. A fire ignited in Adriana. Let him come, she countered, her fear finally incinerated by rage. The rendezvous was set, a Chicago hotel, 2 in the afternoon. Chen wanted to stream him in from a ghost location, but Ethan insisted they appear in person to broadcast strength. They arrived 2 hours early, encased in a moving fortress of federal agents and private security. The hotel had become a sterile, guarded tomb, every corridor under surveillance. Every guest had been screened. Yet Adriana felt the weight of a sniper's scope on her, a primal certainty that Lucian's eyes were on her. The room was a chaotic pit of journalists. Rebecca claimed a position in the front row. As the clock struck 2, Adriana approached the podium with Ethan by her side and Vincent a shadow behind them. The prepared words felt like a lie, so she abandoned them. My name is Adriana Varley Caldwell, she began, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. 3 weeks ago, I fled my own wedding to Lucian Moretti because I finally recognized the cage he was constructing around me. It would have cost me my will, my voice, my very soul. The room fell into a dead, ringing silence. Lucian Moretti is a predator who built an empire on a foundation of fear, and I brought the blueprints. She gestured to the screens, which erupted with a torrent of incriminating financial data. Over the last 6 months, we have compiled evidence of 17 distinct federal offenses. What you see before you is irrefutable. As the press erupted into a frenzy, she raised her voice to be heard. He threatened my family. He dispatched his thugs to abduct me. He has placed bounties on my allies, all while paying for his own immunity with money and influence. She let the silence stretch. That immunity has just been revoked. Today, a man from inside his own organization will speak of the sins he can no longer conceal. Vincent moved into the light, his voice trembling but clear as he detailed decades of rot. He charted a dark constellation of offshore funds, shell corporations, payoffs, and extortion. Then the secret recordings he had kept as a lifeline went live for the world. His testimony was a clinical, devastating blow. Mid-speech, Adriana felt a vibration at her hip. An untraceable message. You just signed your own death warrant. All of you. It was Lucian. She showed the screen to Ethan. Security sealed the exits, but the real trap had already been set. He was watching. The monster in the dark was here. After Vincent concluded, they opened the floor. Rebecca's question was a clean strike. Are you afraid he'll retaliate? Adriana met her friend's eyes. Of course I am afraid, but I'm more afraid of what happens when good people do nothing. When we allow men like Lucian to act without consequence, we tell the world that power is a shield against justice. She looked directly into a camera lens. I am not above the law. Neither is he, and I'm betting that when the light finally hits him, his parasites will scatter. An hour later, it was over. During the extraction, Agent Chen got the call. The warrants were live. Federal and local teams were swarming Lucian's known locations, anticipating a capture within the hour. A dangerous wave of relief washed over Adriana. Not yet, Chen cautioned. A trial still awaits, and his legal predators are gathering, but we have begun. Chen's radio crackled with a new transmission. Her face hardened into a mask of cold fury as she listened. He's gone from every property. He's vanished. The air in the vehicle turned frigid. There was a leak on our side. A muscle tightened in Chen's jaw. We are watching every airport, every point of transit. But Ethan shook his head, offering a far darker theory. He isn't running. That's not his way. He pictured Lucian digging in, preparing for war. Vincent told us he was cashing out. He's funding a fight. Marcus hustled them toward an armored transport. The protocol was clear: return to the safe house and await confirmation of Lucian's capture. The plan disintegrated the moment they cleared the garage, a dark SUV locked onto their bumper. "We've got company," Marcus stated, his gaze fixed on the rearview mirror. "Lose them," Chen commanded from the passenger seat. Marcus wrenched the vehicle through a series of sharp, evasive maneuvers, but their shadow mirrored every turn. A second SUV materialized, confirming their deepest fears. "This is a coordinated attack," Marcus said grimly. "They're pushing us." Chen already had her weapon drawn. "Get us to the federal building now." But the hostile vehicles cut off their route, forcing them away from the city center and toward the skeletal remains of the industrial sector. A third truck appeared, closing their last path of retreat. They were boxed in before a decaying factory. The engine hummed as Marcus scanned for an opening. Armed figures emerged from the SUVs. "Our position is compromised," Chen spoke into her comms, requesting immediate support. The driver's side window shattered. Marcus cried out as red blossomed on his shoulder, and Chen answered with a volley of return fire. Adriana dropped to the floor as Ethan became her shield, a cascade of broken glass raining down on them. "We have to get out of the car," Ethan yelled. "Their objective is to eliminate everyone but you." "I'm open to ideas," Chen snapped, ramming a fresh magazine into her pistol. "The factory. Oh, our only chance is to get inside, find cover, and wait for backup." "That is a terrible plan." "You have a better one." Chen fired 3 shots before reaching for her radio. A bullet struck it, and the device exploded in her hand, spraying them with plastic fragments. They were utterly cut off. On Chen's signal, they broke from the vehicle, sprinting through a hailstorm of bullets toward the factory entrance. The wounded Marcus laid down, covering fire. They crashed inside just as the door frame behind them splintered into dust. The interior was a labyrinth of rusted metal and deep, waiting shadows. "What is the ETA on that backup?" Ethan yelled. 15 minutes, possibly 20. Chen found a tactical vantage point with a direct line of sight to the entrance. "We make our stand right here." From outside, they heard the calm, professional commands of their attackers. This was not a clumsy assault, but a disciplined and patient siege. They were outmatched in men, in weapons, in time. "This is on me," Adriana breathed, the guilt a suffocating presence. "This is Lucian, a man who burns the world when he's told no," Ethan shot back. "His madness is not yours to own." His words were a final verdict. "You chose correctly." A shadow in the doorway was erased by 2 clean shots from Chen's pistol. The others retreated to rethink their assault. A heavy silence descended, punctured by Marcus's ragged fight for each breath. The sharp trill of her phone cut the air like a knife. "Lucian," Adriana said, the speakerphone broadcasting his voice. "Liking the factory?" His tone was chillingly placid. "I once owned it," then came his terms. "Give me what was always mine. You exit that door, enter my car, and your friends walk away. A simple trade. You'll just kill them after I'm gone?" "Perhaps, but your refusal ensures their demise. Your new husband, the agent, your protector, their blood will be on your hands for denying what is real." He paused. "You have 5 minutes to choose." The call ended. "You are not going out there. It's not a choice." "He'll murder you all if I don't." "That's the probable end regardless. Men like him don't permit witnesses." Chen inspected her firearm. "We make our stand here." But Adriana's gaze was fixed on Marcus, his skin gray, his breathing a shallow whisper. Crimson bloomed through the makeshift bandage. His state was dire. "There has to be another way out," Ethan urged, his eyes desperately searching the room. "I've already run the tactical possibilities," Chen interrupted. "This place is a kill box. One way in, sealed windows, and Lucian's men control every sight line." Adriana watched her phone's screen. Lucian's 5-minute deadline bleeding away. 3 minutes remained. "What if I try to reason with him?" she offered. "Buy us more time." "He doesn't reason. He dominates," Chen stated flatly. "His endgame is you in his possession and us in the ground." 2 minutes. Her rebellion flashed before her eyes. Escaping the altar, her public denunciation, the viral evidence that shattered his facade. She had battled so hard for this freedom, now forced to weigh it against the lives of those who had helped her secure it. "I'm going," she declared. "No." Ethan seized her arm. "Listen, I'll go talk to him. I can delay them long enough for help to arrive." "That's suicide. You know what he'll do." "I know what he'll do to you all if I sit here and do nothing." Adriana wrenched her arm from his grasp. "This one time, Ethan, the choice is mine." Chen's radio crackled. "ETA 10 minutes, hold fast." 10 minutes. An eternity she could bargain for. Ignoring their protests, she walked to the door and shouted, "Lucian, I am coming out." Alone, and they are free to go. After a moment, Lucian's voice returned. "A wise move? Come out slowly with your hands where I can see them." Adriana emerged into the harsh glare. A dozen rifles targeted her, yet none fired. Lucian stood by an SUV, immaculate in his suit, a pillar of deranged calm amid the chaos. "Adriana," he said, his tone disturbingly casual. "You've certainly created quite a situation," she retorted. "You were with my cousin on our wedding day?" "That's ancient history." He motioned to his men. "Time to go. We have things to discuss." "The authorities are coming. You think you can just leave?" "I've evaded the feds for 2 decades. A few more hours are manageable." Lucian tore open the vehicle's door. "Get in." Adriana stood her ground. "What is the end to this, Lucian? You murder Ethan and Chen, add a few more life sentences to your collection." "The charges will evaporate. They always do." He was utterly certain. "My legal team is already working to have it all dismissed. They'll claim duress, unlawful surveillance, any excuse to get the charges dropped. Vincent's word is a liability, so he'll be silenced before any trial. Betrayal carries a steep cost." A nerve in Lucian's jaw twitched. "Now get in the vehicle, unless you wish for your friends' deaths to be the result of your little stand." She saw movement from the corner of her eye. Ethan, about to make a heroic, fatal mistake. She fixed her gaze on Lucian. "Why do you still want me?" she asked venomously. "I ruined your name. Half of Chicago sees you as a monster." "I am a monster," Lucian replied, closing the space between them. "But you knew that truth when you consented to our marriage. That agreement makes you my property. I only said yes to protect my father. Now your own is destroyed. His fortune is gone. His debts are public knowledge, and his name is worthless. That failure is yours." Lucian's hand clamped around her wrist like a manacle. "You destroyed your family to protect yourself. How is that different from my methods?" The accusation landed, striking every hidden corner of her guilt. Her father's company was ashes, her mother was silent, and Isabella's messages blamed her for it all. The fallout from her escape had been catastrophic. But then she felt his ghost hand on her throat, recalled his assumption of her obedience, his view of her as an object. "It makes me my own person," she said, her voice a low fire. And that is worth more than anything you could ever possess. Lucian's grip became a vice. You are not your own. You will never be. If you escape today, you will live your life looking over your shoulder, waiting for me to reclaim what is mine. And I suppose you'll be waiting for the federal prosecution you can't escape, or for one of your men to realize the bounty on your head outweighs his loyalty. Adriana held his stare. You are not untouchable, Lucian. Today was proof of that. For a fleeting instant, a shadow crossed his face. Not fear, but perhaps uncertainty. Then the wail of sirens pierced the air, growing louder with each second. Lucian's jaw tightened. Put her in the vehicle now! His men advanced, but Chen opened fire from the factory entrance. Ethan provided suppressing fire from the opposite side. Lucian's team broke formation, returning shots. In the ensuing chaos, Adriana tore herself away and ran. They caught her in seconds. Lucian hauled her before him, a shield of flesh with a pistol pressed to her temple. Everyone hold your fire, Lucian roared. Cease fire or she dies this instant. The gunfire ceased. FBI vehicles were swarming the area, establishing a perimeter, but none had a clear line of sight. Lucian used her body as cover. Release her, Chen commanded. It's finished, Moretti. You have nowhere left to go. Watch me, Lucian hissed, dragging her toward the SUV. The weapon fused to her head. You make a move, she's dead. You take a shot, she's dead. If you want her breathing, you let us leave. Adriana's thoughts ignited. She felt the frantic beat of his heart against her spine and smelled the desperation coiling off him like smoke. A trapped animal is the most vicious. Ethan, she said, her voice unbreakable, remember what we said about courage. Don't, Ethan begged, his face drained of all color. Courage isn't the absence of fear, she went on, her gaze locked with his. It is acting in spite of it. She then drove her head backward into Lucian's face. His grip faltered for a heartbeat, and she spun out of his grasp. In that sliver of an opening, 3 shots echoed through the air. Lucian stumbled backward, crimson blossoming on his shirt. His gun hit the pavement with a clatter. He looked down at his injuries, then up at Adriana, his expression one of pure, blank shock. You was the only sound he made before he fell. Federal agents descended as his remaining men surrendered. Ethan rushed to Adriana, pulling her clear of Lucian's fallen form and scanning her for injuries. Are you all right? I'm okay, she answered, just as the tremors of shock took hold. Medic, Chen shouted from Lucian's side. We need a medic here immediately. They began to treat him, but Adriana saw the wounds were lethal. The shot placement was tight, clinical, and intended to end a life. An ambulance siren screamed as it approached. They began to move Lucian, his face now ashen and his breathing faint. As he was loaded inside, his eyes met Adriana's. This isn't finished, he rasped. But it was. She could see how lifeless he looked, how much blood was being lost. Lucian Moretti, the undisputed king of Chicago's criminal empire, was bleeding out. The ambulance doors slammed. The siren's wail receded into the distance. Adriana stood amid the pandemonium. Agents securing the scene, medics tending to the wounded, news crews arriving, feeling only a profound, soul-deep exhaustion. Ethan's arm was a firm, grounding weight on her shoulders. It's done, he murmured. She tried to accept his words, but Lucian's final threat was embedded in her mind. This isn't finished. Chen approached, her face grim. We need to move you before the media swarms us. We'll need your statement, but Will he survive? Adriana interrupted. Chen paused. The medics are calling it 50-50. If he lives, the charges, attempted homicide, kidnapping, assault on federal officers, ensure he will die behind bars. Death or a cell? The man who sought to own her was now reduced to a medical emergency and a case number. The triumphant rush she'd anticipated never arrived. In its place was a hollow sense of emotional depletion. While giving her preliminary account at the federal office, she felt a phantom buzz from her phone, a conditioned response to Lucian's constant controlling calls. It was the last ghost of his power over her. The phone remained dead. Then, at 8 that evening, Chen's voice cut through the quiet with the verdict. Lucian Moretti expired at 6:43 p.m., she stated, her voice pure function. He never woke up. It's over. Over. Such a tiny word for the collapse of a dynasty built on fear. An entire age of his reign undone by 3 small rounds and a final fatal miscalculation. So what's next? Ethan's question hung in the air. The cleanup will be long. His empire, the money, years of legal fallout. Chen took a seat. But for you, you are free. The safe houses are gone. The guards are gone. Your lives are your own again. Adriana let the word free echo in her mind, a foreign sound she couldn't quite grasp. Survival had been her world for so long. The memory of peace was a ghost. What was it like to not live on a razor's edge? And my family, she asked. Their protection is gone tomorrow. Whether they decide to speak with you, Chen added with a shrug, is something I can't influence. That is a wound I cannot mend for you. I know. Adriana acknowledged the chasm between them was of her own making. Mending things with parents who couldn't comprehend her choices felt like scaling a sheer cliff face. After midnight, they walked out of the building, completely unguarded. Marcus delivered them to an anonymous hotel, a place so ordinary she could use her real name and finally breathe the air of self-determination. Through the glass, the Chicago skyline sparkled, a vast tapestry of light where another version of herself lived a life she no longer knew. Did she even want to find that woman again? The thought was a deafening roar. Your thoughts are screaming, Ethan observed. What are we? She finally asked. The marriage was a legal maneuver against Lucian. With him gone, what is this? A beat of silence. That's your call to make. Don't make this my burden. It isn't. It was a transaction. My protection for your legal shield. If you want out, I'll sign the papers, no questions asked. His gaze was direct. Or, we could try to discover what this is, now that we're not dodging bullets every 5 minutes. Adriana truly saw him then. The man who had repeatedly walked into hell for her sake. The man who had gambled his future on hers. I don't know what I want, she confessed, her voice hollow. My only focus was surviving. I never planned for after. Then take the time you need. The clock isn't ticking. Ethan moved to the bedroom. Rest. Tomorrow, we'll start to figure out what normal is. To Adriana, a normal life was a beautiful, distant myth, and a part of her wondered if she even wanted it. She awoke to unfiltered sunlight, her world no longer seen through the reinforced glass of her gilded cage. The guards had vanished. The hum of security systems had ceased. Only the city's low thrum disturbed the new quiet. After months of sleeping on alert, she had fallen into a deep, true rest. Ethan was already at a desk, his face illuminated by a screen, a hot coffee beside him. He looked over as she entered. Morning? Coffee's made. She poured herself a cup and sat opposite him. She inquired about his work. Damage control. His company was hemorrhaging. Stocks had plummeted. Investors had fled. His board was in chaos. He recited the facts without a trace of feeling. "It's all fixable. It just needs time." She began to apologize, but he stopped her. "Don't." His tone was firm, but not unkind. "I chose this. I knew the cost." She attempted to shoulder the blame for his financial ruin, but he refused to allow it. "I lost money because Lucian was a shark who refused to lose. It's not connected." Ethan closed the laptop with a snap. "Besides, fortunes can be rebuilt. You can't be." That declaration hung between them, heavy and profound. Was this feeling real, she wondered, or just the instinct to cling to her rescuer? The fragile quiet was broken by Sophia's call. Her sister's voice was a thin wire, humming with the aftershock of violence, rambling about Lucian and gunfire. "I'm fine," she lied, the words a shield. "Oh, thank God, I tried calling. Mom said the feds told her you were okay, but nothing else." Sophia drew a ragged breath, bridging the distance between them. "Can we meet?" The words about her parents died on Adriana's tongue. Dad's still enraged. Mom's a wreck, but I'm not them. A defiant strength entered Sophia's tone. "You're my sister." They chose a public cafe, a neutral ground for the coming storm. Ethan offered his presence, but she declined. "This is a conversation I need to have alone." His response, call for an extraction, was a stark reminder of his purpose. Her guardian, her ever-present escape plan. When Adriana arrived, they both paused. For a tense moment, they simply stared before Sophia surged forward, pulling her into a desperate hug. "You're real," Sophia breathed into her shoulder. "I was going crazy. The news, the shooting, the bodies. I thought, I'm okay, I promise." Adriana returned the embrace with equal force. "How are you?" Sophia eased back, a fractured laugh escaping her. "I wasn't the one running from the Mafia for 3 weeks. I believe that's my question." They sat and ordered meals that would go uneaten, then began to assemble the fractured narrative. Sophia detailed their parents' hell. Their father's businesses were collapsing as allies fled. His clients had vanished. The debt owed to Lucian's enterprise was being collected by his heirs. In just 3 weeks, their father, Marco, was a broken man. "He blames you," Sophia stated, her voice devoid of judgment. "He says you sacrificed the family to save yourself." "Perhaps he's right." Adriana's gaze fell. "Maybe I should have married Lucian, played the dutiful wife, and protected everyone." "And then what? Let him possess you forever?" Sophia's tone turned to steel. "Let him strike you for not smiling right, or betray you constantly, or worse." "Audrey, you knew the beast he was. You can't truly wish you remained." "There had to be other paths. Paths that didn't ruin Dad's life." "Dad is ruined because he bargained with evil to hide his own failures. That is his burden to carry." Sophia reached across the table, covering Adriana's hand with her own. "You are not to blame for his sins. You never were. Mom will never see that. Mom has spent 40 years excusing his failings. That won't change overnight." Sophia's expression softened. "But she'll get there. She's wounded and scared, but she's not stupid. She knew what kind of man Lucian was." "And you? Do you hate me?" Sophia let the question linger in the air. "Initially, yes. When we were forced into hiding, when Dad only raged about how you destroyed us. But then I considered your choice. You fled a predator who would have consumed you. You chose life." A faint smile touched her lips. It was the most courageous act I've ever witnessed. Adriana's throat constricted. I felt nothing but fear. Bravery is feeling that fear and acting regardless. Sophia squeezed her hand. So, what's next for you? You're married to Ethan Caldwell. Will you remain with him? I don't know. It was meant to be a simple arrangement, a legal firewall against Lucian. But it doesn't feel like an arrangement now. Adriana withdrew her hand, clutching her mug. He was present for it all. Every assault, every danger, every second I thought was my last. And he never demanded anything in return. It seems you care for him. I can't identify my feelings. I've been fueled by adrenaline for so long I can't separate gratitude from something real. Sophia simply observed her. Do you want to be with him? I want to choose from a place that isn't fear or debt. I need to discover who I am when I'm not living in Lucian's shadow. Only then will I know what I want. That seems fair? Sophia's phone buzzed and her demeanor changed. I should leave. Dad is expecting me. Being late will only feed his paranoia. They shared a final embrace and parted ways. As she departed, Sophia's final words were, You chose correctly, Audrey. Don't let them tell you anything different. Adriana saw her sister dissolve into the urban flow, the words echoing in her mind. Back in the hotel, Ethan was on the phone. She offered a small wave and retreated to the bedroom to process everything. Her phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number sent a familiar shock of fear through her. But then she saw the name, Rebecca Torres. Every news network wants an exclusive. Publishers are calling with deals. You are the narrative everyone wants to hear. Any interest? Adriana just stared at the text. A month prior, the answer would have been an immediate and emphatic no. Not long ago, her only wish was to vanish. Now her fingers typed a reply. Perhaps. Can we talk? Rebecca's call was immediate. Are you actually considering this? I'm weighing my options. What's the proposal exactly? Everything. Prime time, memoirs, the whole spectacle. You're the woman who defied the mob and won. People want your version of events. And if I say no, they will invent one. The tabloids, the unauthorized books, the awful television movies that warp the truth. Rebecca's tone was clinical. If you participate, you own the narrative. Control. The word seemed to haunt her lately. For months, Adriana had been a passenger in her own life, utterly powerless. Now the world was offering her the wheel. Let me consider it, she said. Don't take too long. This kind of attention is fleeting. After hanging up, she sat in the quiet, feeling the weight of the offer. Sharing her truth could be a beacon for others trapped in similar shadows, yet it demanded she walk back through her own personal hell, this time for a crowd that could never truly grasp the scars. Ethan appeared in the doorway. Are you all right? Rebecca thinks I should do interviews, tell my story. It seems I've become a headline. That you have. The conference video has 30 million views. He leaned on the frame. What is it you truly want to do? I'm not sure. A part of me feels a duty to help, to show there is a way out, to show they don't have to be controlled. But another part of me wants to burn that entire memory to ash. Both feelings are valid. Ethan crossed to her side. You don't have to choose now. Breathe. First, focus on what you need. What about you? What do you need? Adriana's eyes met his. For weeks, everything has been about my safety, but what about you? What is your own desire? A heavy quiet fell before Ethan spoke. I want to go home, sleep in my bed, run my company, and find a new normal not defined by death threats. And us? What do you want for us? That choice is not for me to make. Their marriage was a tactical shield. Ethan's gaze locked with hers as he laid it bare. If you don't need that protection, you decide what happens next. No strings, no debts. Whatever you choose, I'll support it. She tested him. Even if I want a divorce. Even then. His voice was solid. Too many people have controlled you. I will not be another. Adriana searched his face, looking for a crack in his conviction. He was offering her pure, unconditional freedom, the perfect hero's move. So why did the gesture leave her feeling so hollow? I need time, she finally managed, to discover who I am when I'm not fleeing a monster like Lucian. So Adriana stayed in Chicago another week, immersing herself in a legal furnace. She gave sworn testimony, outlined Lucian's entire network to a grand jury, and helped the FBI identify his soldiers. The entire ordeal was a brutal pilgrimage back through every nightmare. But a strange thing happened. It began to feel empowering. With each retelling, the past lost its grip. Fear became fact. Trauma became testimony. She was seizing her own history. Then on the 5th day, her mother called, her voice thin with panic. Your father and I must see you now. The confrontation was at her parents' home. The house was unchanged, but her perspective was not. She saw the dusty relics of their former wealth, the posed photos of a counterfeit family, and felt the crushing weight of the expectations that had nearly killed her. In his study, her father seemed smaller, older. Her mother stood like a statue by the window. Sophia said you wished to talk, Adriana started, remaining on her feet. Marco looked up, his face a mask of anxiety. Our attorney called. Lucian's estate is collecting. We owe $17 million plus interest. They were losing it all, the restaurants, the house, their entire world. He pointed the blame at her, his voice dripping acid. You broke the pact that protected us. This stunt, this marriage of yours has ruined us. She shot back. I got married so I would live. His reply, your survival was never the point. With Lucian, you would have been safe, provided for. Adriana's voice went flat. 3 weeks ago, Lucian held a gun to my head. He put contracts on anyone who aided me. Ethan would be dead for marrying me, so yes, my life was on the line, thanks to the man you sold me to. Marco winced. It wasn't a sale, it was business. A transaction where I was the only thing lost. You would have gotten used to it, learned to cope like your mother. That was it. Adriana's gaze snapped to her mother. Is that the existence you wanted for me? A reflection of yours, pretending happiness while your husband destroyed lives? For the first time, her mother's composure fractured. That's not fair, her mom whispered. My entire life I was told to be silent. The one time I speak out, you take his side. You chose his finances over my safety. We chose the family, Marco retorted. A family you destroyed. No. Adriana's voice was like ice. You destroyed this family when you gambled our future on criminals. I just refused to be the collateral. The room fell silent, but for her mother's soft crying. Finally, Adriana spoke. I cannot help with the debt, but I have a suggestion. Ethan knows bankruptcy lawyers who can help you restructure. You won't reclaim it all, but you could salvage something. Her father's jaw set. We don't need your charity. This isn't charity. It is me offering a lifeline. But I can do nothing if you blame me for your own ruin. You must decide what matters more, your pride, or what little you have left. She walked out before they could form a response. Her sister Sophia was by the car. That bad? Father is the same. Mother is still making excuses. Adriana unlocked the car. But I said what needed to be said. Good, they don't deserve you, though maybe one day they'll realize it. Sophia hugged her. Call me when you're ready for a real conversation, not just managing them. I promise. The 40-minute drive was a blur, her mother's expression on a loop in her mind. The ache, the conflict, the betrayal. Lucia truly believed Lucian was the right move, exchanging freedom for a gilded cage. It was the same lie she had told herself for 30 years to justify her own life. Perhaps watching Adriana fight back was like seeing a younger self make a braver choice. When she returned, Ethan was packing. I have to leave, alone. There's a board meeting I can't postpone and several crises at the office that require my presence. He zipped the suitcase closed. But you should stay if you need more time. I don't need more time. I need an ocean. Adriana sat down. Can I come with you to Boston? His expression softened. Of course, a new city might do some good. Definitely. Book the flight, I'll meet you there. She paused. We're married. Can't we just travel together? We can. I just didn't want to presume. There it was again. His cautious, relentless crusade to give her all the control. He intended it as kindness. It only made her feel profoundly alone. They flew to Boston that night. His home was a converted harbor warehouse, all exposed brick and vast windows, Spartan yet warm. The guest room was prepared for her, a clear, unspoken boundary. Make yourself comfortable, Ethan said, setting her bag down. I'll be at work most of tomorrow, but the kitchen is stocked and the Wi-Fi password is on the counter. Ethan, she interrupted, you don't have to handle me like a guest. I'm just trying to give you space to breathe. I understand, but maybe space isn't what I need. Maybe I need... Her voice trailed off, the words lost to her. Need what? Her mind replayed the last month, not just the fear, but the islands of quiet. Ethan's hand in hers, his body shielding her from harm. I need to know if any of this was real, she whispered. Or were we just a consequence of adrenaline and desperation? Ethan set her bag on the floor. What do you want it to have been? That's not an answer. Because I'm not going to dictate how you feel. You've had enough men telling you what you want. I won't be another. What if I want you to? What if I need to know what you're thinking for once, instead of trying to read your mind? Ethan was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke. I think you're the most resilient person I have ever met. Watching you break free from Lucian is the most courageous thing I have ever witnessed. Oh, I think you deserve every good thing this world can offer. He paused. And I think I want to be in your life. But only if that is your choice. Not from gratitude, not from obligation. It must be because you want me there. Her heart began to race. And if I do want you here, then I want you to take me to dinner. A proper date. No agents, no safe houses, no one trying to end our lives. Just two people discovering if this thing between us is real. A slow smile touched her lips. I would like that. The date took place 2 nights later at a small Italian place in the North End, quiet and warm, and they talked about everything but Lucian and the darkness they had left behind. Their histories were worlds apart. His forged in his mother's public service, hers in the ashes of a dream snuffed out by family debt. Her relationship with Sophia was frayed, and her only solace was a private devotion to old cinema. I can't remember the last time I was in a theater, she confessed. Lucian's rule was that people like us were only to watch films in private. "Shall we disappear?" he offered. In moments, they were enveloped in the velvet darkness of a late-night screening, the movie a distant hum. In the shifting light, his hand found hers, not to shield her, but simply to be there. The kiss that followed was gradual, a question posed with no expectation. It held none of Lucian's bruising claim, nor the hollow performance of their wedding kiss. It was a silent inquiry from Ethan, and her answer was to draw nearer. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "Still need more time to know for sure," he murmured. "My own certainty is feeling quite solid." Her reply came as a second kiss, and then a single word. "Stay." "Are you certain?" "For the first time, 100%. The weeks that followed found a fragile, normal rhythm. While he was at work, she began the careful excavation of her past in therapy with the guide who let her control the pace. She began to write. What started as a private journal to quiet the noise in her head blossomed into something more when Rebecca made the call. Adriana agreed to author a book, not a gossipy tell-all, but a tactical guide for women navigating their way out of the confines of controlling partnerships. The entire project was a brutal descent into her own history, compelling her to finally acknowledge the warning signs she had willfully ignored and Lucian's entire architecture of control. But through that torment, her pain transformed into her purpose. 3 months after Lucian's exit, she boarded a plane to Chicago for Sophia's graduation. Her mother was present, maintaining a carefully measured distance. Yet when they embraced after the ceremony, the hug held for a moment too long. "I'm trying to understand," Lucia confessed. "What you endured. I'm truly trying." "That is all I could ever hope for," Adriana replied. Her father, as expected, was absent. Her father remained consumed by his wounded pride after his financial empire had crumbled into ruin. Adriana, in contrast, was building anew. 6 months after the wedding debacle, Agent Chen called with the final report. The syndicate was completely neutralized. The feds had apprehended 47 people, including several compromised officials. "His entire criminal network is dismantled," Chen reported, his tone devoid of emotion. Vincent Delgado's testimony brought the whole structure down. The agent explained, "He is now a protected witness with a new identity, but his information was indispensable." Then Adriana had to ask of Isabella. Chen's expression was a blank slate. "Last seen in Miami, employed as a paralegal." Her old foe tried to frame her own version of events, but Adriana's significant book deal rendered her narrative moot. Adriana felt no triumph. It was simply a final page being turned. Isabella had followed her own corrosive instincts. Adriana had followed hers. Now both lived with the outcome. 8 months after the monster was gone, her book appeared on shelves. Breaking Free was an immediate bestseller. Adriana began a speaking tour, channeling 50% of all proceeds directly to shelters for survivors of abuse. She was transmuting a story of tragedy into an act of power. She was no longer a victim. She was Adriana, crafting a new life from its foundations. 1 year after it all ended, Ethan brought her to Seattle. There, she was introduced to Margaret Caldwell, the architect of his character, who saw them with sharp, knowing eyes. She observed the peace Adriana brought her son, remarking, "So you're the one who finally taught him to slow down." Over dessert, Margaret shared her own narrative of escaping a poisonous marriage, recalling the sheer terror. "But every day was a small step forward," she said. "I had to claim my own peace." "How much time did that require?" Adriana asked. "Years, but it was a battle worth fighting." Margaret gently squeezed her hand. You are light years beyond where I was at your age. After their meal, under a sky like smoldering embers, they walked near the water when Ethan paused. I have to ask you something, he began, and Adriana's pulse quickened. This marriage has existed as a legal document for a full year, but we've never defined what it truly is. He looked directly at her. So, I am asking you now, do you choose to remain married to me, not for safety, but as your own authentic decision? Her mind replayed the last year in flashes, the therapy sessions, the countless words she'd written, the deliberate work of rebuilding her own spirit. She thought of how Ethan consistently honored her autonomy. He was her harbor in the tempest. I choose to stay married, she said, her voice resolute. But we will do it on our terms, not as an escape vehicle, but as the final stop. A pure warmth filled Ethan's smile. So what is our plan? A real wedding, intimate with only our people. Sophia, your mother, Agent Chen, if he's able. Marcus, when he has healed. No 300 strangers, no grand Italian villa, no performance. Just the two of us making our own choice. I find these terms 100% acceptable, Ethan answered, producing a small box from his coat. I have carried this for 3 months, just waiting until you were ready. He lifted the lid. Inside was an understated ring, a quiet rebuttal to the blinding stone Lucian had used to ensnare her. It was a delicate band with a single, flawless gem. Adriana Varley Caldwell, Ethan said, will you marry me again, for real this time? Tears she had long suppressed began to fall freely. Yes, absolutely yes. The ring slid onto her finger, a perfect fit. They were married 2 months later in Margaret's garden in Seattle. Sophia was by Adriana's side, her constant defender. Marcus, his shoulder still recovering, stood with Ethan. Agent Chen attended in street clothes. Rebecca Torres was also present, her reporter's notebook absent for once. Adriana wore a simple white dress of her own choosing, a piece that felt like her, not a designer's vision. The instant Ethan's fingers intertwined with hers, she felt a profound internal shift. The constant state of high alert that had been her companion simply vanished. There was no escape plan, there was only this. The vows they composed were brief, heartfelt, and direct. He pledged to support her healing, whether she required closeness or space. She pledged to trust him, to be vulnerable, and to build something that was not destructive. Following the ceremony, Ethan leaned in. You know what they say, the third time's the charm. She laughed as they kissed, the moment feeling like a genuine starting point. The reception was a quiet, comfortable gathering. Sophia found her near the dessert table. You look truly content, her sister observed. I am. Is that strange? No, Sophia replied, drawing her into a hug. It's absolutely perfect. You have earned every moment of this, Audrey. All of it. As the day softened into evening, Adriana found a quiet moment with Margaret Caldwell. Ethan's mother handed her a glass of wine. Thank you, Adriana said quietly, for raising him to be the sort of man who truly helps others heal. I only taught him that every person deserves a chance to author their own life. He did the hard work. Margaret gazed at the water. Some wisdom. Don't let your trauma become your entire identity. It happened, but it isn't the whole story. Scars simply prove you were stronger than the thing that tried to destroy you. Margaret's gaze was filled with kindness. Go and write the rest of your tale however you wish. You have won that right. Adriana's thoughts turned to her book, to the foundation they were building, and to the women who wrote to her, saying she had given them the courage to fight back. She considered how Lucian had wanted her small and silent, and how she had become his complete antithesis, visible, outspoken, and utterly unbound. "I think I've already begun," Adriana answered. 18 months after a wedding that was both an end and a beginning, she stood on a stage before 500 people. She knew this speech by heart, but a slight tremor remained in her voice, a faint echo of her past. She spoke through it. She spoke of identifying the subtle tactics of a controller, of dismissing glaring red flags, and of how love becomes entwined with peril. She spoke of the day she chose survival. She described the aftermath, the difficult landscape of healing, and the laborious process of reclaiming your own identity. The applause at the conclusion was immense, but that was not her measure of success. The real victory was in the faces of the women who approached the stage after she had finished. Their accounts were a clear echo of her own. She heard repeated whispers of, "That was my life." They were searching for an escape, for an alternative, for just a fragment of hope. Adriana gave them everything she had. From the side of the room, Ethan watched, a quiet pride on his face. When the group thinned, he approached. "You were incredible," he said softly. "I was utterly terrified." "Courage and terror often live in the same place," he replied, gently reminding her. A small smile touched her face as she relaxed. "So, should we make our escape?" Immediately. They stepped out into the Chicago night, their hands linked. The city, once a sprawling cage, now felt like their own domain. Her phone buzzed with a message from Sophia. "Dinner next week? Your mother wishes to see you." The words felt less like a request and more like a tentative ceasefire. Adriana offered the phone to Ethan, whose gaze held an unspoken question. "Do you think she is ready for this?" "It's an unknown," she conceded. "But if she is willing to be there, then so am I." Her reply was sent, the screen fading to black. The airport awaited. Boston was calling them back to the home they had forged. There was a feeling of permanence now, of finally setting down roots. Ethan's business had flourished, untouched by the turmoil of the past year. Adriana's foundation was expanding, offering sanctuary to more women each month. They were creating a real existence. It was imperfect, shadowed by her past and his dedication to work, but it was founded on truth, and it was theirs. In the vast human current of the airport, Adriana watched the clusters of travelers, families, couples, those flying solo. Each carried their own private universe of struggle, of moments they decided to simply continue. "Where did your thoughts go?" Ethan asked softly. "Just to the distance we've covered, the gulf between who we were and who we are now." If he had inquired about regrets, her mind would have replayed the entire catastrophe. The ruined wedding, the desperate flight, Lucian's brutal end, and the slow climb from the wreckage. "No," she said, the word a final judgment on her past. "Good," he responded. "I have something waiting for you at home." Her question, "What is it?" was met not with an instruction, but with an offering of faith. A surprise? Trust me. Her acceptance of it demonstrated how far she had traveled from the psychological prison she once inhabited. This new bond was built on earned trust and deliberate love, the very opposite of force. A boarding announcement served as their cue to leave this chapter behind. They vanished back into the anonymous flow, their former high-stakes identities dissolving. Here, the narrative was not of the fugitive and the billionaire fixer, but simply of Adriana and Ethan returning home. The ability to be unseen, she realized, was the ultimate prize of her hard-fought liberty. 3 years after her world had fractured, Adriana commanded a different sort of stage. Not a wedding altar or a courtroom, but the opening of her foundation. Housed in a renovated Chicago building, the Varley Caldwell Center for Survivor Support was a bastion providing legal counsel, therapy, and safe harbor for women escaping their own disasters. Sophia cut the ribbon, an honor Adriana had insisted upon. Their mother was in attendance, fragile but composed, while their father's absence was marked by a floral tribute, a quiet signal of a mending in progress. The retired Agent Chen served as a consultant, and a fully healed Marcus now directed the center's security. Rebecca Torres's report on the inauguration highlighted its vital mission, deliberately ignoring the specters of past scandals. Ethan stood by Adriana's side, their hands clasped as the first clients entered. "This place will be a lifeline for so many," he murmured. "That is its entire purpose," she replied, her hold tightening with resolve. "They have to see that it's possible," she said with intensity. "To escape, to survive, and to construct an entirely new life." He simply nodded. "You are living proof of it." 3 years had passed. 3 years of building, not just of breathing. But the ghosts remained. The night terrors, the hair trigger reflexes, and the scars Lucian had carved into her soul. But now she had an arsenal against those ghosts, an entire institution ready to save thousands, a marriage built upon profound respect, and a sacred pact with her sister. Her work had purpose, her words had weight, her life was her own. That evening, on the center's rooftop, they surveyed their new dominion. "Do you remember asking what I wanted?" she asked. "In that hotel, after Lucian was gone, I had nothing. My entire being was defined by fear." She turned to face him. "I know now. I am choosing all of it. This mission, my fractured family, and us. This thing we built from wreckage that is now profoundly real." A genuine smile finally touched her lips. "I want to continue this work, to help others, and to reclaim my own power every single day." Ethan merely wrapped her in his arms. "It sounds perfect." She smirked. "Not perfect, it's mine." He whispered back, "Even better." They stood together as the Chicago sun dipped below the horizon. Two survivors who had raised an empire from ruins. The city lights below pulsed with a million other stories, a million other wars for autonomy. Adriana imagined another woman at the same precipice she'd faced 3 years ago, trying to discern fear from love, a cage from a home. She hoped that woman would find the center and her own chance at a new beginning. Freedom is an internal battle, both terrifying and worth everything, which is why you risk all you have to win it. It is why you burn down your known world to fight what seems a losing war. You must choose yourself repeatedly until it becomes instinct. Adriana learned that lesson in the flames, and it is now etched into her very code.